Hey guys, it's Kaylee, welcome back to my channel. So today I am here for my June wrap up. I have managed to finish another 4 books in the month of June since my last weekly wrap up, so I thought I would just do a video wrapping up the month. I did read 5 books in the sort of first 2 weeks of the month, so I will pop them on screen now, and if you're interested in hearing my thoughts on any of those books, I will link my Friday Reads weekly wrap ups down below and you can check those videos out. But in this video, I'm going to talk about the 4 books that I have finished since then. So, the first 2 books I have to speak about I'm kind of going to lump together because they're both part of the same series, and that is the Wayward Children series by Shannon Maguire. So I read book 3 and 4 this month, so that is Beneath the Sugar Sky and In an Absent Dream. My thoughts on these 2 books are really different. So Beneath the Sugar Sky is probably my least favourite in the series so far, and In an Absent Dream is probably my favourite. So I'll talk about Beneath the Sugar Sky first of all. So this book kind of follows on from the end of the first book, so rather than it being like a prequel or like an origin story, it's continuing the story forward. And I don't know exactly, but I think it must be set like a few years maybe after the end of book 1, because we do see some of the same characters, but then there's also some new characters introduced in this book. And I think that was one of the first things that I didn't really love about this one. I think obviously like these books are so short, so we don't really get a lot of time with each character anyway. And I think because we went from book 1 to book 2, we went back in time and kind of explored a couple of characters in more detail. I was hoping in this one that we would just come back to the same cast of characters and explore them and develop them a little bit more, like further in time, but we didn't get that. So I think some of the new characters in this book I didn't really connect with as much as I'd wanted to, and I didn't really feel like I got to know them or was really invested in their story that much, to be honest, which was a little bit of a disappointment. The exception to that though was Remy, and she was a very well developed and vibrant character, and I was actually really excited to read this book because Sumi was my favourite character from book 1, so having the connection with her I think I was really excited about. But overall I just felt like maybe the tone of this book was just a little bit too sweet for me and a little bit too overdone. And I think that sort of bled into some of the character dialogue. So for me, I just found Remy's dialogue to be really annoying, to be honest, and I just didn't really like hearing the character interactions in this one much at all. I should say I listen to these books on audiobook, so I don't know if that kind of hinders or helps my enjoyment of the book sometimes, you know, with the different narrators, and each book in the series I think is narrated by a different person. So I don't know if it was maybe just that I didn't get on with the narrator doing these character voices in this one, I'm not sure, but I just didn't really love that. So if you don't know, this book is set primarily in a new world, so we are in, I guess, like Candyland, and it was a really fun world. Like what I really love about Shannon Maguire's writing is, number one, like her descriptive writing, so not the dialogue, but when she's like world building and stuff, like that is what she does super well, and I think that was done well in this book. Like you really get a sense of this Candyland world. I just thought it was maybe just a little bit overdone, and it just didn't really do it for me. Like I just didn't really enjoy that side of things, and although I loved her writing, it was almost like it was like a game where every single sentence or everything had to be described like a type of sweet or confectionery, so it just kind of got a little bit too much for me. But overall I still really enjoyed the story. I think I was just not as invested, like I say, in the characters. I was kind of getting a bit frustrated and annoyed with some of the dialogue, so overall this one was just a fairly enjoyable read. I think I gave it 3 stars. It's probably more like a 2.5 or like a low 3 stars for me, but it was still enjoyable, and yeah, I'm glad I read it, but it wasn't anything special. The next one in the series, however, In an Absent Dream, was by far my favourite so far. I absolutely loved it, and I think it was weird because after finishing Beneath the Sugar Sky I kind of had like lower expectations going into this one, but I absolutely loved it. So this is kind of set up as like a standalone in the series, so this is another one where we kind of go back and see an origin story. In this case we're learning about Lundy and her childhood, but when I first went into this I didn't realise that, so I was kind of just going in thinking, okay, this is just like a whole new set of characters. And the number one thing about this book that I loved was the characters. Like, I loved Lundy. I feel like she was just like so relatable to me, and the world in this book was the world that I would have been in if I was a child in this book series. Like 100%, I would have just thrived on the rules and regulations of this world. It was just amazing. So I think that's what pushed it over the edge for me. I just loved her character and I loved the world. But even the supporting characters in this book, like the archivist was just amazing, and I honestly would read a whole book about the archivist and about this world again. Like, I would just love to explore every aspect of this world and the people in it. I just thought it was really, really fascinating. And I think for me, this one, it kind of, the difference between this one and the last one was that this one had the elements of like whimsy and magic, but it also had sort of dark tones, and it was done with a little bit more nuance, and it was just a bit more mysterious, and I think I just preferred that tone to the book. Yeah, I just really loved it. I also had a look, and this narrator, her name is Cynthia Hopkins, I think she narrated the very first book that I listened to as well, and she is definitely like by far my favourite narrator. Like, each and every character in this book had a distinct voice, and I think that just made the whole experience so much better, and I was just super, super invested in this story. I absolutely loved it. The only thing that didn't make this a 5-star for me was that there were some parts of the book that seemed to be, and I know she probably did this because we had to like explain all the parts of the world, but I think when a book is so short, it was quite apparent that there were large chunks of the book that were just like character monologues, like just a lot of dialogue, having a conversation, like basically explaining parts of the world, which I know, like I say, you probably need that to explain everything, but I think in a book that's, I don't know, maybe only like 200 pages, it was just quite apparent that that was there. So yeah, that was slightly annoying. And then also, I don't know, because I listen to these books when I'm driving, so I don't know if anyone else is like this, but sometimes I just like zone out because I'm driving, so like something will happen and I'm concentrating on the road instead, and then I'm like, oh, I've not actually listened to a whole chapter, like I don't actually know what happened to that. And so there were elements of this where there was one element in particular that I had a moment where I thought to myself, like, I don't actually know what happened there, but then I was doubting myself and I didn't know if it was because some of the action happened like off screen, which I've seen in a couple of reviews that people said that. So yeah, I don't know, that's like, it didn't really hinder my enjoyment of it at all, to be honest, but it was just a thing in the back of my mind that I was like, maybe that was just not the most clear what happened if the action's happening off screen and then you're just being told about it after the fact. So yeah, but overall this one by far was my favourite, and I have to say, because I've been listening to these on Scribd, I wasn't planning on buying like physical copies of these books to reread, but this one has absolutely made me want to do that. This one's made me want to go out, buy the books to have on my shelf, and go back and reread, and it's kind of made me want to go back and read the first book again, now that I know Lundy's backstory. So yeah, just really, really lovely experience reading that one, and I'm excited to move on to the next one in the series. The next book that I have to talk about is another audiobook. So this is a memoir, How We Fight for Our Lives by Saeed Jones. And this one, again, I read on Scribd during my commute. I listened to the audiobook. And this one I've wanted to read for ages, and it definitely did not disappoint. So I went into this book knowing a little of Saeed's background. So he is a poet, and he is a black gay man, and so I kind of knew that the book covers those sorts of themes, and I kind of had an expectation of what the writing would be like because he is a poet, and I definitely wasn't wrong. Like, the book is so like lyrical and like has such a fluid quality to it. Like, it's such an easy listen, especially because the audiobook is narrated by Saeed himself, which I think just makes it like 10 times better because you really get into the rhythm and like the emotion of what he's talking about. So this is his memoir, and he talks about his childhood, growing up, into his adolescence and into like early adulthood. So he talks about his experience at school and going to university, and he kind of talks a lot about his experience as a black boy and then like discovering his sexuality as well. And he's quite honest and open about that and all of his discoveries, and him basically just exploring himself, and the interactions and experiences he has with other people, and how that helps and hinders him really discovering about his place in the world and how the world views people like him. He also talks a lot about his relationship with his mother and his grandmother, who he lives with. And I guess this book is almost like, it's like a love letter to his mum. He talks a lot about that, and it's not necessarily a focus throughout the whole book, but he comes back to it, and it's like a recurring theme where he talks about his mum. So yeah, this one is just it's very emotional, it's very honest, like I said, and it was just really interesting to hear from his perspective, and which is obviously so different from mine, and told in such a beautiful way. This book is quite short as well. The audiobook was only like 5 hours, and I know some people had said in reviews that I've seen or read that they kind of wanted more, like it felt quite short, like that was the only criticism, is that they just wanted more. But for me, I feel like it was very succinct in and of itself. I felt like I got what I needed from it, and he said what he needed to say, and I thought it was just a very well-rounded text. So this is another one where I 100% will be buying a physical copy of this book, because I want to reread it and annotate the hell out of it, and yeah, just like read passages again and again, because I thought that it was brilliant. I gave this one 5 stars. So I would highly recommend that you try that if you've been thinking about it. And then the last book that I have to speak about finally is Mockingjay by Suzanne Collins. This book took me absolutely forever to finish, and I was really annoyed about it. But basically, I think partly it was obviously because I went from not working to being back at work, so like I didn't have as much time. But I think a large part of the reason why is because this one, for me, suffers quite a lot in pacing compared to the other two. And I know that some people have issues with pacing with all 3 of them. For me, I didn't. I just had issues with this one in terms of pacing, because I think, like, this story is obviously the inevitable conclusion that we all know was coming. Like, obviously the end of Catching Fire is like the revolution has officially kicked off, so we know that this book is just going to be like a war book, and that is what it is. Like, it's unapologetically a war book. So I think because of that, there's obviously not going to be as much of the same action as we were getting in the first 2 books. Like, we had Hunger Games in the first 2 books, and like a lot of build up to what was going to happen here. So I think the book is very realistic and honest in what would have happened had this situation been real. Like, it's not trying to be a story with a start, middle and end. It's just being realistic, and I think because of that, it's quite relentless in its events. So it's kind of just like military strategy after battle after military strategy after battle, and it's the same thing again and again. And although it was interesting, I think that just suffered, it made the pacing suffer for me. And so I didn't really quite get my momentum with this one. Like, I would sit down and read one chapter and put it down and do something else, rather than reading like a chunk at a time. So that's probably my biggest criticism of this book, and why I don't think I enjoyed it as much. But I have to say, I still absolutely loved this, in terms of its character development as well, and it's the way that Suzanne Collins explores like the effects that these things have on Katniss in particular and the people around her, I think is really, really, really honest. And you know, Katniss's character has evolved so much from book 1, and we see elements still of her like ruthless personality in some of the decisions that she makes. But then at the same time, there's a lot of things that she says and does in this book that you're just like, oh my god, she has just been absolutely destroyed by what's happened in her life. Like, it makes you remember that she is just a 17-year-old girl who has kind of been thrust into this situation. She's not like this political symbol. She's not been brought up knowing that that's what she's going to do and be the face of this revolution. And you can tell it's really taken a toll on her. So I really appreciated that part of her character. I also think, like, obviously this is a YA book series, so the love triangle is part of the story, but I think that, again, Suzanne Collins does a really good job in this book of making that not, like, the main focus. There were still elements of the character interactions between Katniss, Gale and Peeta that I was just a bit like, oh, why, like, that's a bit annoying, but I think it's because I'm not, like, your average YA reader that reads for that sort of thing. So I was, like, maybe just a bit frustrated that that was there, and obviously there's so much other stuff, bigger stuff going on in the whole world that I'm like, why are you bothered about your teenage love? It was just annoying. But I feel like overall, it definitely wasn't like the main part of the story. It just kind of came up in moments, maybe in the downtime when they were like not, you know, bombing places. And I thought it was just quite realistic, I guess, again, like how a teenager would view their love life, I guess. And I think, yeah, the decisions that Katniss ultimately comes to, again, I like totally appreciated them. And I think it was just handled really well, in my opinion. So yeah, I actually really did enjoy this one. Definitely didn't have the same like compulsive, like readable quality that the others did, but was still a really enjoyable read, and I just definitely appreciate what Suzanne Collins actually did in terms of wrapping up the story, and the sort of things that she was talking about in the themes here. So yeah, still a really strong end to the series. I did give this one 4 stars compared to 5 stars for the other two, so it was definitely my least favourite, but still really enjoyable. And I have now started reading A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. I'm literally like 1 chapter in, but I will be talking about that in my next wrap up, whenever that may be. So that is all of the books that I read in June. 9 books I think that is in total, which was considerably less than the last few months, but still a good reading month all round. Some 5-star books in there, so some new favourites, which I'm happy about. My July reading, I'm hoping, will pick up a little bit now that I'm like in the zone of being back at work, but we'll see. So yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. If you've read any of these books, please let me know what you thought of them down in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I will hopefully see you in my next video. Bye!